My name is Renee. I was 37 years old, a full-time pediatric nurse, and the woman who had been carrying my household on her back for nearly a decade. The mortgage, the daycare, the double shifts, all of it. When I opened a baby monitor app in an Atlanta hotel room and watched my husband walk another woman through my home like she already lived there. I was supposed to be gone until Sunday. He knew that. He counted on it. What he didn't know was that the HD camera I'd activated that morning, the one with night vision and a live recording feed, had been running for 6 hours, and I had already saved every second of it. He thought he was alone. He thought I was 400 miles away and completely in the dark. He had no idea I was watching. He never did. Let me tell you how I got here. Before we dive in, comment where you're watching from today. And if stories like this speak to you, hit subscribe, because tomorrow's story is even more intense. The coffee was already made when I got downstairs. That was the thing I remembered later. Not that Derek had done something cruel that morning, but that he'd done something almost kind and still managed to make it feel like nothing. The pot was full and hot. My travel mug was right there on the counter. He just hadn't filled it for me. I filled it myself. The way I filled most things. It was 5:14 in the morning. My conference bag was already packed. I'd done it the night before, the way I do everything, because waiting until morning means rushing, and rushing means mistakes. 3 days in Atlanta, a nursing leadership conference I'd been waitlisted for twice before finally getting a spot. I had my scrubs for the clinical workshop, my dress clothes for the evening sessions, my CEU materials in a labeled folder. My name badge lanyard was clipped to the outside zipper. I didn't forget things. I never forgot things. Layla was still asleep. I went up to her room the way I always did, careful on the third step because it creaked, hand on the door frame before I crossed the threshold. She was on her back with one arm flung over her head, the way she'd slept since she was 4 months old. I kissed her forehead and she didn't stir. She smelled like baby wash and something sweeter underneath that. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds longer than I needed to. Then I went back to being efficient. You know what nobody tells you about competence? It becomes invisible. You do things so well, so quietly, that people stop seeing the doing at all. For 3 years, I'd been running this house the way I ran a shift, anticipating problems before they became crises, covering gaps, staying steady when things got loud. Double shifts at the pediatric unit to cover the mortgage when Derek's numbers were down. Layla's pediatrician appointments scheduled 6 months in advance. The grocery order, the daycare pickups, the permission slips, the birthday gifts for kids in Layla's playgroup whose names Derek couldn't keep straight. All of it. Me. And the whole time, Derek had opinions about me. My body, mostly. After Layla, he had a way of saying things that technically weren't cruel, but landed cruel anyway. You used to be more spontaneous. Said once when I turned down a last-minute dinner plan because I had a 6 a.m. shift. I just feel like you're not really here anymore. Delivered on a Tuesday night when I'd been awake for 19 hours. And the one that still sat in my chest like a splinter. You have this face you make, Renee. This serious face. Like everything's a problem to solve. Said by a man whose problems I'd been solving for 9 years. I remember when he used to cook catfish on Sunday afternoons, flour-dusted fillets, that old cast-iron skillet his mother gave him, Frankie Beverly playing from a Bluetooth speaker in the kitchen window. The apartment we rented before the house had thin walls and sun that hit the kitchen hard by noon. I used to sit on the counter and watch him cook and think, this is the one. I thought I knew him all the way through. That man, not this one. I set my mug down by the door and went back upstairs one more time. Not for anything I'd forgotten, for the baby monitor. It was a good one. My mother-in-law had given it to us last Christmas, the kind with a wide-angle HD camera, night vision, motion detection, and an app that streamed live to your phone. Full rotating view of the nursery and the hallway just beyond the door. I used it on long hospital shifts to check on Layla when the sitter was there. I activated it before I left every single time. I propped it on the shelf across from the crib, angled out toward the hallway the way I always had it. I opened the app on my phone, confirmed the feed was live and clear, and watched Layla's little chest rise and fall on the screen for just a second. Then I picked up my bag, locked the front door, and got into the Uber that was already waiting. Derek was still in bed. I hadn't woken him. He hadn't asked me to. At the gate, I did what I always did while I waited. Opened my banking app out of habit, scanning the joint account the way you scan a monitor panel before a shift starts. Just a sweep, nothing specific. The charge stopped me. $312, 2 nights ago. A restaurant called Fieldcrest Kitchen, over in Elmhurst, 20 minutes from our house. A place I'd never heard of, never suggested, never been to. I sat with it for a moment, turned it over. Derek hadn't mentioned dinner out this week. He'd said Tuesday was a late night at the office. I told myself I'd ask him about it when I got back. I put my phone in my bag. My flight was boarding. I had no idea it was already showing me something I wasn't ready to see. That same evening, 9:47 p.m., the salad was the sad kind. Iceberg, 2 cherry tomatoes, a packet of dressing that tasted like it had been made in a factory in 1987. I ate it anyway. I was too wired to order anything real, too tired to care about the difference. The conference had been good. Long, but good. 8 hours of sessions on pediatric care protocols and nursing leadership pipelines, and I'd taken notes the whole time, the way I always did, because information costs nothing to collect, and you never know when you'll need it. I'd sat next to a charge nurse from Memphis who'd built a float pool system I wanted to bring back to my unit director. I'd had 2 real conversations and approximately 11 that were just networking theater. By 9:30, I was in my hotel room with my shoes off and the television on mute, and for a few minutes I was almost relaxed. Then I remembered to check on Layla. I opened the monitor app the way I opened it every night I worked a long shift. Automatic, no thought behind it, just a habit shaped by 2 years of not wanting to be too far away from her, even when the job required it. The app loaded. The feed went live. The nursery was dark. Layla was on her back, one arm flung up the way she always slept, her little chest moving slow and steady. Safe. Fine. I was about to close the app. Then I saw the hallway light. The wide-angle camera caught it, the frame just beyond the nursery door, the pale rectangle of light from the hall. Movement. Derek passed through, still dressed, tie loosened. I leaned forward, the salad container forgotten. A woman followed him. She was young, natural hair pulled up, a few loose pieces at her temples, a dark dress, fitted, that did not come out of my closet. She walked close behind Derek the way a person walks when a space already feels like theirs, not hesitant, not angled like a guest, comfortable. Her hand found the center of his back as he turned, and she didn't reach for it. It just landed there, like it knew where to go. My hands went still on the phone. I watched. The motion sensor kept the feed active. They moved in and out of the hallway frame, into the bedroom, back out again, Derek going toward the kitchen. The woman lingered. And then she did the thing I still can't fully explain, the thing that moved past hurt and landed somewhere colder. She stopped in the nursery doorway. She looked at Layla sleeping. She didn't rush past. She didn't glance and move on. She stood there, in the frame of my daughter's door, and she looked. The way someone looks when they're imagining something. My jaw locked. That was the moment. Not the hand on his back, not the dress, not any of it. A stranger standing in my child's doorway, like she was already calculating how it might fit into a future that had nothing to do with her. From down the hall, the audio carried. Derek's voice first. "She won't be back until Sunday. We've got time." Then hers, lighter, easy. "You sure?" Derek laughed. Actually laughed. "I'm sure." She called him babe. He called her Tanya. I opened my notes app and I typed. Timestamps. What I saw, what I heard, the exact words. I did it the way I document patient observations. Clear, sequential, without editorializing, because emotion is not useful in a record. Then I opened my screen recorder and I pointed my phone at the monitor feed and I let it run. I captured the hallway. I captured her face when she turned back toward the camera's angle. Clear enough, sharp enough, night vision doing exactly what it was designed to do. I captured Derek's hand on her waist as they moved back through the frame. I captured the timestamp in the corner of the app, 9:52 p.m. Then I closed the recorder and I opened my travel app. The first flight home left at 6:10 in the morning. I booked it. One way. No checked bag, because I hadn't brought one. I could be home before 11. I did all of this without crying. I want to be clear about that. Not because I was numb and not because I was strong in the way people mean when they call a woman strong to avoid calling her devastated. I just went somewhere quiet inside myself. Somewhere efficient. There would be time for the rest of it later. I turned the television off. I lay back on the hotel pillow and I stared at the ceiling for a long moment. Then I picked up my phone one more time. I opened the banking app. And I didn't just look at this week. I scrolled back. 6 months. Slow, methodical. The way you trace a symptom backward to find when it actually started. 14 charges I didn't recognize. 14. Different amounts, different places. A pattern that had been sitting right there in plain sight, and I had explained every single one of them away. I put the phone face down on the nightstand. Tomorrow, I told myself. I come home tomorrow. The next morning, 6:10 a.m. The plane was half empty. I took a window seat and I didn't look out of it. I opened my notes app before we'd even pushed back from the gate. Not to grieve, not to replay what I'd seen. I made a list. Because that's what I do when something is trying to pull me under. I make a list, and I work the list, and I do not drown. What I need. Documentation already saved. Banking records going back 6 months. Whatever is in that folder I'd half seen on the kitchen table 3 weeks ago. A full picture of our joint accounts. Someone I trust. What I will not do. Cry in front of him. Let my face say anything my mouth hasn't decided to say yet. Move before I know the complete shape of what I'm dealing with. I wrote that last one twice. Somewhere over Tennessee, I put the phone in my lap and just breathed. I thought about Layla waking up this morning without me there to get her juice. I thought about Derek handing her a sippy cup and acting like a present father. The image made something tighten in my chest, and I filed it away with everything else. You know what I didn't do on that flight? I didn't rehearse the confrontation. I didn't play out scenes in my head, didn't write speeches, didn't imagine his face when I told him I knew. That's not strategy, that's theater, and I wasn't there to perform anything. I was there to be ready. 3 gates before boarding, Atlanta Hartsfield, 7:42 a.m. I called my best friend Claudette, a fellow nurse I'd known since our first year of nursing school, the woman who had once driven 40 minutes at midnight to sit with me in a hospital waiting room when my mother had a health scare, from the jetway before I crossed into the terminal. I didn't tell her everything. I wasn't ready for everything to be spoken out loud yet. I said, I need you to be available this week. Something happened. A beat of silence. Then Claudette said, I'm here, whatever you need. That was it. No questions, no panic, no flood of her own feelings that I'd have to manage on top of mine. Just, I'm here. That's the thing about a friendship built over years of 12-hour shifts and real loss and showing up when it costs something. You learn how to be useful without making it about yourself. She was already there before I even hung up. Home. 10:43 a.m. My Uber pulled up and I sat in it for 90 seconds before I got out. Just 90. I wasn't stalling. I was settling, pressing everything back down to where it needed to be before I walked through that door. Derek's car was in the driveway. Inside, the house was clean, noticeably clean. The kind of clean that happens when someone has something to hide from the air itself. Counters wiped, floors swept, a candle burning on the kitchen peninsula in the scent I only lit for company. He'd opened the good windows, too, moving air through a space. Old instinct. I noted it. I said nothing. Derek was in the kitchen. He looked up when I came in, and something shifted in his face. Surprise, and underneath it, the fast, careful recalculation of a man who needed a second to catch up. "You're back," he said. "Thought the conference went through tomorrow." It ended early. Layla came barreling in from the living room, and I crouched down and held her, and for a moment that was the only thing that was real. Her weight against my chest, her hands patting my shoulders like she was checking that I was solid. I pressed my face into her hair, and I stayed there one breath longer than usual. Derek said, "You should have called. I would have picked you up." I looked up at him. "I know." 2 words. I turned back to Layla. I spent the next hour being normal. I fed Layla lunch. I sorted a basket of laundry that had been sitting by the bedroom door. I moved through my own house like a woman who belonged in it. Because I did, and I wasn't going to be displaced from my own rooms by my own feelings. Derek's jacket was draped over the back of the chair in the bedroom. I checked the pockets while I was collecting things for the wash, the way I always did, because that man had sent a cell phone through the dryer once and acted like it was a shared tragedy. My fingers found a folded receipt. I opened it without pulling it out of the pocket. The wine bar on Fieldcrest, 2 nights ago. Dinner for 2. $148. I held it still, took the picture with my other hand, and tucked it back exactly as I'd found it. Then I finished the laundry and carried the basket to the bedroom. That's when I saw the brochure. It was half tucked under Derek's side of the mattress, the corner of it visible because the bedskirt had caught slightly on the edge. A new-build townhouse community. Glossy cover, a smiling couple on the front that looked nothing like us. I lifted it with 2 fingers. 40 minutes away, 1 unit circled in pen. I put it back at the exact same angle. Let me tell you something about a woman who's been quiet too long. She notices everything. She always did. She just used to let it go, told herself it wasn't worth the argument, told herself she was being too serious. Funny how that word kept coming up. I was done letting things go. That night, after Layla was bathed and down, I sat at the kitchen table. Derek was in the living room with the television on, his feet up, the picture of a man with a clean conscience. I could hear the low murmur of whatever game he'd found. I opened my phone. I went to contacts. I typed 2 words, "My attorney." I pressed call. 3 days later, early afternoon, I drove to Claudette's house with the screen recording saved in 2 places and a list of banking anomalies printed on a single sheet of paper I'd folded into thirds. I hadn't told Derek where I was going. I said I needed to run errands. He nodded without looking up from his phone. That was the thing about those 3 days. He hadn't changed. Not his routine, not his tone, not the comfortable way he moved through the house like a man with nothing pending. He kissed Layla good morning. He asked what I wanted for dinner Tuesday. He slept on his side of the bed and I slept on mine, and I did not flinch, did not pull away, did not give him a single degree of temperature change to read. I was still, completely still, the way I get before something hard at work, before a procedure that requires a steady hand and no margin for hesitation. Claudette met me at her front door and just opened it wider. No greeting, no questions. She'd set coffee on the table and pushed the throw pillows off the couch so there was room to spread things out. I sat down and I showed her everything. She watched the screen recording without a word. I watched her face instead of the footage. I'd already memorized the footage. I saw the moment she registered Tanya in the hallway. I saw the moment she recognized something. Her expression didn't break open, but it tightened, and she set the phone down on the coffee table with a deliberateness that told me she needed both hands free. Then she said, "I have to tell you something." My hands went still in my lap. She'd seen them. 8 months ago, at a restaurant across town, Derek and Tanya, a corner table, not a working lunch. She described it the way you describe something you've been replaying, the way Tanya had touched his forearm when she laughed, the way Derek had leaned in, the specific body language of 2 people who had already crossed every line and were comfortable on the other side. She hadn't told me. She'd calculated. She was certain of that word, certain that she wasn't certain enough. Suspicion wasn't proof. Blowing up a marriage on a restaurant sighting wasn't a call she was willing to make without more. And then months passed, and the longer she held it, the heavier it got, until she was carrying it the way you carry something you can't put down and can't explain to anyone. "I'm sorry," she said. "Renee, I am so sorry." I looked at her. I understood her calculation. I didn't agree with it, and she knew that without me saying it, which is what 9 years of real friendship allows. I let a beat pass. That was all she was getting from me on it right now, and she accepted that. You know what the worst part was? It wasn't that Claudette had stayed quiet. It was what she told me next. She knew Tanya. Not personally, by reputation, through a colleague in the hospital network where Derek's company held accounts. Tanya had been at a work event, said something within earshot that Claudette's colleague had found worth mentioning. About Derek's wife. About me. Too serious, always working. Like those were flaws. Like a woman keeping a household and raising a child and building a career was something to roll her eyes at over cocktails. I recognized the words before Claudette finished the sentence. Those were Derek's words. Tanya had borrowed them so thoroughly she'd started using them in public like they were her own observations. She'd walked into my marriage, learned my husband's resentments, and turned them into her personality. My jaw locked. That's the only thing I'll say about what I felt right then. I sat with it for exactly 1 moment. Then, how long has this been going on? Based on the restaurant sighting and the date on the Fieldcrest receipt, at minimum, a year. I nodded. I'm not filing yet. I need the full financial picture documented before he knows I know anything. Every account, every asset, everything he's moved or hidden. I need it all on paper first. Claudette didn't hesitate. She reached for her own phone. She had an attorney, a woman who specialized in marital asset litigation, had handled 2 cases for nurses in their hospital network. Sharp, thorough, and fast when she needed to be. I called her from Claudette's couch that afternoon. I had an appointment by the end of the week. I drove home in the kind of quiet that isn't empty, the kind that's full of things clicking into place. The affair was a year old at minimum. The hidden account, whatever was in that folder, the real estate brochure, the 14 unrecognized charges, none of it was reckless. None of it was impulsive. Derek had been building something parallel to our life for a long time, quietly, while I paid the mortgage and got up at 5 and kissed a sleeping child goodbye. I was 3 miles from home when my phone rang through the car speakers. The name on the dash read, Bertie. Derek's aunt. 61 years old, a retired school teacher, a woman who had always treated me with a specific warmth that felt genuine because I believed it was. I reached over and answered. "Renee, honey," she said, "do you think we could get coffee? Just us?" Her voice carried something underneath the question, something that had been sitting too long. The following Saturday morning. The diner Bertie chose was the kind of place that hadn't changed its menu since 1994. Laminated pages, coffee that came before you asked for it, booths with high backs that gave you privacy without asking for it. I got there first. I always get somewhere first. Bertie came in from the cold with her coat still buttoned and her purse held against her side like she was bracing for something. She saw me, and her face did the thing faces do when guilt meets relief. A softening and a tightening at the same time. She slid into the booth across from me, and the waitress set down 2 mugs and walked away. And before the coffee had stopped steaming, Bertie started to cry. Not loud, not dramatic, just the quiet, steady kind that comes from a woman who has been holding something at arm's length for months and finally put it down. I didn't reach for her hand. I didn't tell her it was okay. I waited. "He came to me in September," she said. "Said he needed to talk to someone. Said things weren't right between you 2. September. 4 months ago. I filed that away. He said you'd changed since Layla came. That you were distant. That he felt like he was living with a roommate, not a wife. He said he felt trapped, Renee. And he actually asked me whether I thought you'd be okay. On your own. Let me tell you something about hearing your husband pre-sell your abandonment to his own family. There is a specific cold that comes with it. Not hot anger. Cold. The kind that settles in your chest and stays there. I'd carried this man through 14 months of unemployment without a single word of complaint. I remembered the way our little duplex smelled on Sunday afternoons: cornmeal and oil, Derek's catfish in the cast iron, the man I thought I'd chosen. I cooked the sides, we ate on the couch because we didn't have a dining table yet. He used to say I was the steadiest person he'd ever known. That man, I thought, that man would not recognize the one sitting across from Bertie in September. I kept my face even, one question at a time. Did he mention the house? Bertie pressed her lips together. He said if things didn't improve, it might be time to think practically, that you could sell, split everything fairly, make a clean start. He made it sound reasonable, like it was already a conversation you two had been having. We had never had that conversation, not once. He'd been rehearsing, walking into rooms with his family and practicing the version of events that made him sympathetic. The quietly unhappy husband who'd tried, who'd grown apart, who was being reasonable about an ending neither of them wanted. He'd built the whole stage set before I even knew the play was running. I wrapped both hands around my mug. Bertie, she looked at me. Her eyes were still wet. I need you to remember every word of that conversation, not the feeling of it, the words, what he said, how he said it, what he asked you. Renee, I should have called you sooner. I need a witness, I said. That's all. At some point, someone is going to tell a very different story about this marriage and how it ended. I need someone in that story who knows what was actually true. The look on her face shifted. The guilt didn't disappear. She'd be carrying some version of that for a while, and she knew it. But something else moved in behind it, something that straightened her spine by degrees until she was sitting the way I imagined she used to sit in front of a classroom. Upright. Present. Ready. I remember, she said. I remember all of it. I nodded. That was enough. 2 hours later, I pulled into my driveway to find Derek's car gone and a text from the sitter saying she had Layla at the park down the street and they'd be back by 3. I sat in the car for exactly 30 seconds. Then I went inside. The house was quiet in the specific way houses get when no one's been home for a while. That settled, breathless stillness. I walked through the kitchen, down the short hall, and into Derek's home office. I didn't hurry. I didn't hesitate. Second drawer on the right. I'd seen it weeks ago, a manila folder half visible when I'd walked past, and Derek had shifted something with his forearm without thinking. The unconscious move of a man protecting something he assumed was already safe. I pulled the drawer open. The folder was there. My name wasn't on it. Nothing was written on the tab at all. I opened it. The first page was a bank statement, personal savings account, Derek A. Holloway, opened 18 months ago. I stood there and read it the way I read a chart, top to bottom, nothing skipped. The balance was $22,340. I didn't make a sound. My hands went still against the paper. I turned to the second page. Deposit history, going back a year and a half. Regular transfers, modest amounts, 300 here, 500 there. Nothing large enough to register as missing from a joint account. Nothing that would have tripped a wire. That was the point, wasn't it? Not a theft. A slow drain. The kind you don't notice until the tank is empty, and you're the one who's been pushing the car. I started cross-referencing in my head, and I didn't even need to look anything up. I knew those months by feel. March of last year, I'd picked up 2 extra shifts to cover Layla's new daycare when they raised their rates. Derek said money was tight. April, I'd paid the mortgage alone because Derek said his commission check was late. June, July, August, the months I'd been running the joint account down to the wire, telling myself we were just in a lean stretch, that it would even out. It hadn't evened out. It had been pouring into this account instead. He was never stretched thin. He was building a runway. I thought about how many nights I'd stood at the kitchen counter eating leftovers because I was too tired to make myself a real plate after covering a double. I thought about declining the girls' trip Claudette planned last spring because I said I couldn't swing it financially. I thought about the specific math of a woman holding everything together: mortgage, groceries, daycare, utilities, while the man she was holding it together for was quietly setting money aside for the life he planned to have without her. You know what $22,000 is? It's 18 months of patience. It's a woman's sacrifice converted into a man's exit strategy, and he did it one deposit at a time. I pulled out my phone. I photographed every single page. Slow, steady, making sure each one was clear and legible. Then I texted them to my attorney. Then I uploaded the entire batch to the private cloud folder I'd set up 4 days ago, the one Derek didn't know existed, on an account tied to an email address he'd never seen. Then I put the folder back. Exact position, exact angle. The way a woman does when she's been a nurse long enough to understand that disturbing evidence is worse than finding none. I stood up and turned to leave. The family photo stopped me. It was on the corner of his desk, a 5x7 in a frame Bertie had given us. Layla at 6 months old, round-cheeked and startled-looking in the way of babies who don't understand cameras. Derek was grinning that wide, easy grin he had back then. And I was there too, holding Layla against my chest, smiling at something off to the left of the frame. I remembered that day. I remembered it precisely. I had been back at work for 3 weeks. 3 weeks postpartum, back on the floor in compression socks, charting with hands that were still swollen at the knuckles. I'd worked a 10-hour shift that morning and come home to Derek in a good mood because his sales team had won some kind of regional competition. He'd gotten the day off as a reward. He'd ordered food and called a few friends, and there was music playing when I walked in the door, and I smiled because I was glad he was happy. And someone handed me the baby and said, "Smile." And I smiled. I was running on 4 hours of sleep and sheer will in that photograph, and I looked like someone who had everything she needed. Did I ever tell him how tired I was? Maybe not. Maybe that was on me. I carried things quietly, and he had learned over years that I would. I set the frame back down. That evening, 6:15. I heard Derek's key in the lock and had the cabinet open before he made it to the kitchen. He came in with a brown paper bag and that loose, easy energy he carried when he thought the day had gone his way. "Got Ty," he said. "That place on Morrison?" "Good," I said. I was already pulling plates down. He set the bag on the counter and started unpacking containers, narrating as he went. Pad See Ew, spring rolls, the curry I usually liked. He was comfortable, relaxed, a man who did not know the ground had already shifted 2 inches under his feet. I set the table. He talked about traffic on the way home. I asked if Layla was still with the sitter. He said he'd seen her in the driveway on his way in. She'd be back any minute. Normal. Ordinary. The particular performance of a weeknight that means nothing. When he slid a plate across to me, I looked up. "Thank you," I said. "Smells good." He smiled. He had no idea. I gave him one more normal night. 2 weeks later. He started talking after dinner. I knew it was coming. I'd known for 3 days. The way you know a storm is building before the sky changes. Something in the air pressure, something in the way a person stops quite meeting your eyes. Derek had been careful lately, considerate even, refilling my coffee without being asked, asking about my shifts. The specific attentiveness of a man who is about to do something and wants the ledger to look balanced first. Layla was already asleep. He'd waited for that, too. He sat down across from me at the kitchen table and folded his hands and took a breath, and I thought, he practiced this. "Renee, I think we need to talk about us." I set my mug down. I didn't say anything. He went. All of it, the whole speech. He'd been unhappy for a while. Not her fault, not entirely. Just a growing apart kind of thing. He loved her, he said. He'd always love her. But he wasn't in love with her, and he thought she probably felt it too, even if she hadn't wanted to name it. He said something about Layla, how they'd always be a family in that way, how that would never change. He talked about the house, said maybe they should get ahead of it, talk to a real estate agent before things got complicated, split things fairly, start fresh. He used the phrase "start fresh" twice. I let him have every word, every pause, every careful sentence he'd rehearsed in the car, probably, or in the shower, or standing in front of the bathroom mirror checking whether he looked like a reasonable man. When he finally stopped, the kitchen was very quiet. I looked at him. "I know about Tanya. You know what a man looks like when his entire script evaporates. It's not dramatic. It's small. His chin dropped maybe half an inch. His hands, still folded on the table, went tight. I kept going. I have video. I have your account statements. I have the folder from your second drawer. And I have a witness to the story you told your family before you told me a single word of any of this." He opened his mouth. What came out was everything I expected. She'd changed after the baby. She wasn't the same person he married. She was never really present anymore, always working, always somewhere else in her head. He wasn't proud of how it happened, but Tanya made him feel seen, actually seen, in a way he hadn't felt in years. He wasn't saying it was all her fault. He wasn't saying that. But this wasn't entirely his fault either, and he needed her to hear that. He needed her to understand that. I let him finish. My jaw was locked, but my voice came out even. "Feel whatever you want," I said. "You can't have this house." I slid the legal packet across the table. My attorney's letterhead, clean and formal on the first page, his name printed exactly right. He stared at it the way a man stares at something he doesn't want to be real. His hand moved toward it, then stopped. His face went still. Not the easy, practiced stillness of a man managing a room. The other kind. The kind that comes when you realize you read someone completely wrong and there is no recovering that ground. I stood up. He reached for his phone before I'd even cleared the doorway. I didn't turn around to look. I didn't need to. I knew the number he was pulling up. I knew the conversation he thought he was about to have. What I knew, and he didn't, was that 4 days ago I had forwarded a concise, factual HR complaint to his company's compliance office, time-stamped screen-recorded footage, documentation of the overlapping client portfolio that made their relationship a direct policy violation, a cover letter that was 3 paragraphs long and said everything it needed to say without a single extra word. His phone call wasn't going to land the way he needed it to. I walked down the hallway to Layla's room, pushed the door open slow, the way you do when you don't want to wake them. The nightlight threw a soft orange glow across her crib, across her cheek pressed into the mattress, across the little fist she'd curled under her chin. I sat on the edge of the glider we'd bought when I was 7 months pregnant, the one I'd assembled myself on a Tuesday evening while Derek was at a work happy hour he'd forgotten to mention until the morning of. I watched my daughter breathe. And for the first time in 3 years, 3 years of double shifts and swallowed silences and smiling for photographs on 4 hours of sleep, I felt entirely certain of what came next. Not relieved, not triumphant, just certain. The specific stillness of a woman who has finally stopped waiting for a situation to resolve itself and has resolved it herself. Layla made a small sound in her sleep and turned her face the other direction. I stayed right where I was. The morning after. Derek was already on the phone when I came out of the bedroom. I could hear him in the kitchen, low, tight, the specific register of a man making calls he didn't expect to have to make. I didn't catch every word. I caught enough. Something about what she had, something about what that meant, something about timing. I made Layla's oatmeal. I poured my own coffee. I sat at the table and opened my phone and texted my attorney a single line. "Has the compliance office confirmed receipt?" Her reply came in 4 minutes. "Confirmed as of yesterday. They've opened a review." I set the phone face down and drank my coffee while it was still hot. You know what people don't tell you about this part? It's quiet. The real moves, the ones that actually cost someone something, they don't make noise. There's no confrontation in a parking lot. There's no screaming. There's a cover letter and a PDF attachment, and a compliance officer somewhere opening their inbox on a Tuesday morning. I'd done my research carefully. Derek's company had a conduct policy that was specific and unambiguous. No romantic or personal relationships between employees who shared a client account chain. Derek and Tanya shared one. He was her indirect supervisor through a set of overlapping regional portfolios. That wasn't my interpretation. That was the org chart. The screen-recorded footage showed Tanya in my home, time-stamped, clear enough to identify her face. A work night, not a weekend, which meant she had been in my house, with my child asleep down the hall, on a night when both of them had a 9 a.m. team meeting the next morning. I included that detail in the cover letter. I thought the compliance office should have the full picture. I had not called Tanya. I had not gone to her job. I had not sent her a single word. I handed the documented facts to the people who were already paid to handle exactly this kind of thing, and I let the institution do what institutions are built to do. Some women would have wanted the confrontation. I understood that. I just didn't need it. My name was on a mortgage. My daughter was in that nursery. The confrontation I needed was already on paper, and it had a letterhead. Derek came out of the kitchen sometime around 9. He looked like a man who had not slept. I looked like a woman who had. He stood in the doorway and watched me feed Layla for a moment. Then he went back down the hall without saying a word. I remember thinking, that's the first honest thing you've done in months. I recalled, for just a second, the way he used to sing Layla to sleep those first weeks home from the hospital. Off-key and completely unself-conscious, her tiny hand wrapped around his finger. That man existed. Whatever happened to him was not my fault to carry anymore. I wiped Layla's chin and got her dressed for the sitter. Within the week. The administrative review moved fast, faster than I expected, honestly. I found out through my attorney, who had a contact in HR consulting, not insider information, just professional overlap. The review concluded. The findings were what the findings were. Tanya was transferred. Not fired, transferred. A regional office 2 hours away from the one she'd built her career in. Lateral title, lateral pay. No upward path visible from that position, and a commute that would eat an hour and a half out of each end of her day. The kind of move that looks neutral on paper and isn't. Derek received a formal written reprimand, the kind that attaches to a personnel file and follows a person through every review cycle they'll ever have at that company. The promotion he'd been positioning himself for, a senior director role his manager had been quietly grooming him toward, was removed from consideration. Quietly. No announcement, just gone. I did not celebrate. I'm telling you that honestly, not to seem above it. I just didn't feel what I thought I'd feel. What I felt was closer to a finished thing, a column of numbers that finally balanced. Let me be plain about something. I didn't file that complaint to hurt Tanya. I filed it because what they did was a documented policy violation, because she stood in my daughter's doorway like she was already imagining herself into a future she had no right to, and because I have spent enough of my life absorbing things quietly and calling it grace. This was not grace. This was documentation. What the company did with it was their business. What she did in my home was mine. 2 days after the transfer decision, my phone lit up on the kitchen counter while I was starting dinner. I glanced at the screen. Tanya's name, a number I recognized from the call log I'd pulled during those first careful weeks. My hand went still on the counter. I looked at her name. I thought about every word she might have prepared, every explanation, every accusation, every version of a conversation she thought she was owed. I let it ring. I didn't owe her my voice. I didn't owe her my time. I didn't owe her a single syllable of any explanation for any choice I'd made. Some doors you don't open. You just make sure they can never open from the other side either. The call went to voicemail. I turned back to the stove. 10 days after the settlement was signed. The papers had come through on a Wednesday. My attorney called me at my lunch break, and I stepped into the supply hallway at the hospital and listened to her read the terms back to me in the steady, practiced voice of a woman who has delivered good news to people who needed it badly. The house. Primary custody of Layla. A settlement figure that reflected Derek's hidden account, plus 2 years of calculated diversion, plus his attorney's fees on top of my own. The number was clean. It was accurate. It was everything the evidence said it should be. I thanked her, hung up, and went back to my patient's room. I didn't tell anyone that day, not even Claudette. I just carried it quietly through the rest of my shift, the way I carry most things, filed away, handled. Mine. But there was one thing left that I needed to do. I called Aunt Bertie first, then Derek's mother, a woman who had been kind to me for 9 years and who deserved to hear the truth from my mouth, not from a filtered version of it that arrived 3 months later through Derek's careful editing. I asked if they would come. I told them I needed an hour, a quiet space, and no interruptions. I told them Derek would be there. Bertie didn't hesitate. Derek's mother was quiet for a moment, then said, "I'll be there." I called Derek last. I told him where and when. He asked what this was about. "One conversation," I said. "Then it's done." He came. The following Saturday, 2:00 in the afternoon. We met at Bertie's house because it was neutral, and because Bertie had offered, and because a woman who was trying to set the record straight should get to choose the room. Bertie had put out water glasses and nothing else. No coffee, no pretense of hospitality. She understood the assignment. Derek's mother sat on the small sofa, hands folded. Bertie sat in the armchair across from her, back straight, chin level. Derek stood near the window for a moment, then sat in the single chair furthest from everyone, like a man who had already calculated his exits. I sat where I could see all three of them. I didn't bring notes. I didn't need them. You know what it feels like to say the true version of something out loud in front of witnesses? It feels like setting down something you've been carrying uphill. Not dramatic, not satisfying in the way you imagine it will be, just done. I told them about Tanya. I told them how long it had been going on, based on what I could document. I told them about the account, opened 18 months ago, while I was covering the mortgage and the daycare and the groceries without a word of complaint. I told them about the exit story Derek had pre-sold to Bertie 4 months before he ever said a single honest thing to me. How he had framed himself as the sympathetic party. How he had practiced looking reasonable before the facts could catch up to him. I did not embellish. I did not editorialize. I laid the timeline down like a patient's chart. Dates, facts, sequence. Derek's mother pressed her hand to her mouth somewhere around the hidden account. Her shoulders dropped. The sound she made wasn't quite a cry. It was something more private than that. The sound of a woman absorbing something she cannot unknow. Bertie did not make a sound. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes fixed at a point somewhere past Derek's left shoulder, and she did not move them once in his direction. That stillness was its own kind of verdict. Derek said nothing. He looked at the floor. He looked at the window. He did not look at me. Good. When I finished, Derek's mother lifted her head and asked the question I expected. Her voice was unsteady. "Is there anything we can do?" I picked up my purse from the floor beside my chair. "Raise better men," I said. I stood, thanked Bertie for her home, and walked to the door. I did not look back at Derek. I didn't need a final image of him. I didn't need to see what his face did when the door closed. What I needed was already done. The truth, spoken plainly, in a room full of people who had loved us both. He could not perform his way out of that room. He could not revise it later. He could not call Bertie in a month with a softer version because Bertie had been sitting right there. That was all I'd come for. I drove home with the windows down. The afternoon was warm and the radio was on, and I wasn't crying and I wasn't celebrating. I was just clear. I had said everything that needed saying, every word that was owed. I would not say any of it again. 14 months later. The coffee was still hot. That sounds like a small thing. It isn't. For 3 years, I drank my coffee lukewarm because I was always doing something else first. Getting Layla settled, packing Derek's lunch he'd forget to take, answering a question nobody needed to ask that badly. Hot coffee was a thing that happened to other women on television. That Saturday morning, I sat at my kitchen table and drank a full cup while it was still steaming. Layla was across from me with a fistful of crayons and a coloring book she was treating like a professional assignment, tongue tucked between her teeth, very serious about a purple elephant. The morning light came through the window at the angle I liked. The living room behind me was painted a deep, warm terracotta, a color I'd wanted since before we moved in, a color Derek had called too much every time I'd brought it up. I'd had it painted the second week after the settlement. It wasn't revenge. It was just a wall. But I looked at it every morning, and it reminded me that I was living in my own choices now, not someone else's comfort. You know what nobody tells you about starting over? It isn't the big moments that tell you you're going to be okay. It's the small ones, the ones that only matter to you. 3 months before that Saturday, I'd been promoted to charge nurse. My unit director called me into her office on a Thursday afternoon and slid a folder across her desk. New title, new pay grade, a bump in responsibility I had honestly been ready for 2 years earlier, but hadn't pushed for because I'd been too busy managing everything else. I signed where she pointed. I thanked her the way I thank people, briefly, without performance. That evening, I drove to the jewelry counter at the department store near the hospital, and I bought myself a pair of earrings. Gold hoops, small and clean. They cost $83, which I paid without looking at the total the way you do when you know the money is yours and only yours. Small things feel different when you've earned them clean. That's not something I could have explained before. It is something I know now in my bones. I wore them the next day. I've worn them at least twice a week since. Claudette and I had a standing monthly dinner by then. Not at the wine bar on Fieldcrest. We had an unspoken agreement about that. Never confirmed, never discussed, just mutually understood. There was a place on the other side of town with good lighting and better pours, and we'd claimed a corner table that the hostess had started holding for us without being asked. One night she leaned across the table laughing so hard at something I said that she knocked over the bread basket, and I laughed until my eyes watered, and a woman at the next table smiled at us like she recognized something in it. I thought about the version of me who'd been so worn down she'd forgotten she was funny. Derek used to go quiet when I made a room laugh, a particular kind of quiet I'd learned not to examine too closely. I examined it now. I knew what it was. I didn't miss managing around it for a single second. I remembered the two of us in nursing school, sharing a bag of chips at 3 a.m. before a clinical rotation, both of us too tired to talk, just sitting in the same exhausted silence like that was enough. It had been enough. It still was. On a Tuesday in October, I walked Layla to her new preschool for the first time. She wore a backpack that was nearly as big as she was, and shoes with lights in the soles that she had picked out herself and refused to reconsider. She held my hand for exactly half a block, and then she didn't need it anymore. When we got to her classroom, she found her cubby, her name on a little paper bear above it, and she walked up to it like she had always known it was hers, hung her backpack, turned around to check that I was still there. When she saw me, she waved once, quickly, already done with goodbye, already interested in what came next. I stood in that doorway for a moment longer than I needed to. Lightness. That's the only word for what I felt. Not happiness exactly, though that was part of it. Lightness. The specific, physical feeling of a woman who is no longer managing someone else's version of her life, no longer making herself smaller so someone else didn't have to feel large, no longer translating herself into something easier to be around, just standing in a doorway watching my daughter own a room. That was mine. I built that. Not despite everything, through it. Claudette told me, a few months after my promotion, that Derek and Tanya had ended. 6 months after his transfer, apparently. I wasn't surprised. A man who cheats with you will cheat on you. And Tanya learned that particular lesson without a single word from me. She arrived at that conclusion the same way she'd arrived at everything else in this story, by making choices and living inside their consequences. I didn't feel satisfied when I heard it. I didn't feel much at all, honestly. It was just information, the kind that confirms what you already knew. Derek was renting a 1-bedroom apartment across town. He called for Layla on Wednesdays and every other weekend, and he was polite and he was careful, and I matched his energy exactly. No more, no less. Layla loved her father. That was real. and it was worth protecting. Everything else was paperwork. He never knew I was watching. He never knew how long I'd been paying attention. He saw a woman who was quiet and took that to mean she wasn't noticing. He saw a woman who didn't fight back and took that to mean she couldn't. That was his first mistake. His last one was believing I'd fall apart when he left. I didn't fall apart. I just finally got out of my own way. And if I'm being honest, that's the best thing that man ever did for me. Thank you for watching until the end. If this story meant something to you, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. I've got 2 stories on the screen that you have to watch next. Have a great day.